The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
I was the victim of a home invasion this morning.
What?
Yeah, no shit.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Not pigeon?
No, I was attacked by a Persian cat in my bathroom. Look, I'm literally injured.
Oh my
It bit the shit out of me.
You nearly lost another finger.
And I know.
No mai haere mai. Kia gone by lunchtime ko Toby Manhire toku ingoa kia ora Annabelle li meitha.
Tēnā koe, Toby.
Kia ora,
Tēnā
Ben.
korua. Tēnā tātou.
And kia ora te Te Ahi Butler.
Tēnā koutou.
I also want to acknowledge Scott Morrison, who in May last year was appointed to host this podcast and has been doing so since, so thank you to him. We're talking 9 a.m. on Wednesday, August the 17th. Thank you to Spin-off members. If you want to destroy us and don't want this podcast to continue, do not join Spin-off members. What to talk about? The week before last, when we were engaged in some messaging, it felt to me like a beautiful, old-school, vintage, classic week in politics because we had this... The stories was lead up to the National Party conference, and we had cost of living payments going to florists in Switzerland and literal dead people, and we had Christopher Luxon castigating the Labour Party for behaving something like something out of The Office. He said that in 3 different interviews, and then he promptly walked downstairs to the tiles, turned on Spotify, and sang Lunch Money Lewis at length, and it just felt lovely. And then everything kind of got a bit bleaker, really, I guess, because there were, the 2 people that we're going to devote most of this podcast talking about, which was, look, if a fortnight ago, if we'd said the names Gaurav Sharma and Sam Uffindell, you probably would have said, who is he, and whatever happened to that interesting satirical blog, The Civilian. And now they're everywhere, the headlines everywhere. They're both suspended from their caucuses, respectively Sam Uffindell from the National Party caucus and Gaurav Sharma, as of last night, from Labour. There might be some things that they have in common. I don't want to overdraw all of that, but let's start with Gaurav Sharma. Very quickly, for those who haven't been paying attention, last Thursday, we're speaking today on August the 17th. I maybe already said that.
You did.
Still August the 17th.
Good signposting.
It's only been 6 days since the op-ed dropped.
Yeah.
Since the drop-ed.
And also,
nice.
Even stranger, we'll come to this, but only 9 days since the Ben Uffindell story dropped from Kirsty Johnson.
Uffindell?
Did I say?
Yeah.
What?
Sam,
whatever. Ben Uffindell's got a lot to answer for. 6 days ago, op-ed in the New Zealand Herald. Weird op-ed. It was like reading something out of a Dan Brown novel that you had to decode. Or I wrote this in a piece that was like walking into a movie over halfway through, and you're like, what is going on? And you read it. I read it again. It's like, what's going on? And it was some obviously some quite serious allegations that underpinned it, but there weren't any specific allegations in there. But it talked
How do you
bullying
think that came
harassment.
about? Do you think he would have reached out to the Herald and said, look, I've got some things that I want to share, or do you think it they just reached out to him
Do
and said,
you think
hey, as a new MP, are you interested in writing an op-ed on this?
About your experiences.
Or just something.
Yeah, we've done a 10-minute interview with the new Labour list MP about going and canvassing at the markets on Sunday. Have you got anything to add?
I think
the
I
best
read
eats in Hamilton
somewhere-
West.
What about a Byzantine plot of bullying?
I read somewhere that it was unsolicited, and so I think
of
it
course.
just landed in the inbox. And having edited comment stuff for years, you kind of see an MP's submitted op-ed land in the inbox, and normally your heart sinks and you go, oh God, what are they going to be like? I mean, British MPs are much worse than New Zealand ones, but they'll probably have someone on the phone giving you hell about how this is the most important issue of all time, and it's incredibly boring, incredibly self-serving, and normally deeply, deeply uninteresting. Well, this one was interesting, but it was also, to that point, Annabelle, the whole context was written into the Herald headline. It's weird. There was no write-off, and they scrambled, and then there was the Herald had the story, and Thomas Cochrane did some great coverage of it early on. But we had to piece the bits together, and the first kind of indication of what it was really potentially about was in Trevor Mallard, who quite, craftily responded by saying, I can't speak to any specificity, I can't speak to any cases, but I will say that we introduced rules, this is in general terms, to deal with people who had lost staff members and who, how they would have to go through various processes before replacing them, giving a very, very, very heavy wink that what we were dealing with was a staffing issue, and Gaurav Sharma, the first-term MP from Hamilton West, being upset about his ability to staff his office. And then we had this kind of weird few days, right, where it was like an asymmetric warfare between the statements from the whip, Labour whip, and Prime Minister doing a stand-up or two, and at the same time Sharma issuing these social media posts, which to some degree contradicted, to some degree convoluted, to some degree clarified the different allegations, including one incredibly long Facebook post that was at about 7:30 on a Friday night, which is a interesting time to put something like that. It was about 3,000 words long.
Yeah, and that was it was numbered points, and that came the closest, I think, to actually setting out what you would call, the kind of theory of the case. His idea of why he had been bullied, or
his proposed statement of facts.
His affidavit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
but without the particulars. So, for instance, he alleged a misuse of public funds by an MP and a staffer. He didn't give what in court filings would be called the particulars, saying what the misuse of public funds.
Not in that case. He did in some examples though, because he said he said I will name my bully, and the bully that he named was Kieran McNulty, who's no longer the whip, is now a minister in cabinet, but was the whip at the time, and who denies allegations of bullying and harassment.
And of course, some of the context of this is Kieran McNulty would have to be probably one of the most universally beloved MPs, right? He's sort of the Mr. Nice guy. He's the self-deprecating Kiwi bloke with his falling down, ute wandering around New Zealand. And so, this kind of adds a bit of frisson, because immediately it fairly or not, makes it harder for Sharma to prove his case. Because people tend to, McNulty's guy. There's a lot of good
within caucus, within the
not
party,
just within caucus, but across Parliament, and across Parliament and the media.
One of the examples
but so it would be fantastic, like if it was this kind of. It was like one of those 80s horror movies, where there's a satanically 6-year-old child, like the only person, like McNulty is some kind of sort of secret workplace psychopath, but the only person he reveals it to is Gaurav Sharma.
Like a Scooby-Doo ending where he rips the mask off. And
and at every point, as soon as somebody comes into the room where McNulty is psychologically torturing Sharma, and then he comes in and he's like, hi everybody, and then just acts normally,
I watched his maiden speech last night.
Oh yeah.
And it's such a shame because he is so funny and smart and passionate and irreverent, and you can see why he would have been chosen. He's a great communicator. He was talking about how he's the most handsome MP to represent Hamilton West after Trevor Mallard, and how only 3 Labour MPs had won that seat before, and what an honour it was. So you can see why a guy like him would be selected. It's just one of those incredibly difficult situations, because when someone naturally, in a bullying situation, me personally, I tend to empathise with the person who has the least amount of power. Mm-hmm. When people, which in this case I guess would be the staffers, and it's important to remember that, MPs get elected, a lot of them have zero background when it comes to managing people or managing an office, or and in his case he's a doctor. He's never had to do any kind of HRE stuff before. But then when people cite mental health issues, that's really concerning. It's just a really difficult situation to navigate your way through. And I watched Ardern's stand up yesterday, and I thought they've done a pretty good job in a very difficult circumstance, and I think it's good that they've left the door open to him, because you can see when you look back on that maiden speech all of the reasons why it was thought he'd make a great MP. The reality is it's highly unlikely he'll be back next election anyway. It's Hamilton West is traditionally a pretty safe national seat, and he surfed into Parliament on the red tide. So the reality is it's unlikely he would have returned as an electorate MP, but I think his chances of getting back as a list MP now will be pretty minimal.
Let's just say on that we send our best to him, that whatever happened or didn't happen, he's probably in a pretty isolated place right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully he's all good. Just to summarise what Annabelle
and hopefully his staff are all good too.
Yeah, well, Annabelle was talking about the caucus meeting and press conference yesterday, and during which it was announced by Ardern that he had been suspended from caucus. The door was left open that would be revisited in December. Basically, he was given a opportunity a way back, but the condition is very clearly don't send any more screenshots.
Can I say one of the aggravating factors in this that's been really unhelpful is some of the, and I won't name them, but I've seen some on Twitter, like the ex-Labour MPs who have been weighing in on it.
Including on Sharma's Facebook feed.
Exactly.
Incredibly strange, incredibly unhelpful.
Yeah.
So you can imagine every time that Jacinda Ardern or one of her team sees Darian Fenton pop up on social media,
Yeah.
Look, but so part of the lack, there's a lot of confusion here. Like you were talking about Dan Brown, the sort of, it is difficult to get a fix on what's happening here, because essentially there's this sort of Russian doll of accusations of bullying, right? So all of this started off outside of the public eye with employees of Sharma or employees of Parliamentary Services who worked for Sharma in his office complaining that he was a bully. Well, or complaining that he was difficult to work with, or making some kind of complaint about the working relationship. The remedial steps that were taken, and this was supposedly, this is apparently in response to the Debbie Francis report about bullying in Parliament. The steps that were taken by Parliamentary Services with the party whips apparently rubbed him up the wrong way. He felt he was being sort of sidelined and bullied himself. His concerns he felt weren't being addressed, so he felt gaslighted, and then, then of course we have the sort of sense that Sharma is now bullying the entire Labour Party caucus, because the Prime Minister stood up and said, well, we had to have a kind of kangaroo court pre-meeting of the entire caucus without him to provide a safe space.
There was a very interesting
for the most powerful people in the country.
And so the evening before, just again for people who aren't following this closely, on Monday evening, not a caucus meeting.
No, informal chat.
Just a meeting with everyone from the caucus.
Just a download. Just a download.
Informal get-together of some MPs, i.e. all of them except Gaurav Sharma.
Not a caucus meeting, a meeting of caucus was convened via Zoom. And that was, as Ben says, explained as being because, there's no reason not to believe that there's truth in this, that it was because people felt that because he had breached their confidence in the past by leaking materials, that they needed to have that safe space in which they... The only issue with that really is that one might presumably have said if anyone wants to discuss anything at any time, get in touch with us and talk about it with rather than having to have everyone in the same space. So you can understand from Gaurav Sharma's point of view that he felt as though it was a stitch up, and the caucus meeting that he was invited to attend the next day was really just a facade.
And of course Ardern, she's correct, from a political management point of view. Of course, you're not going to have starting from the beginning chat through of all the issues while Sharma is there recording everything, ready to send it to Thomas Coughlan at the Herald, right? Obviously, you're not. So the only question was, in what manner are they going to stitch him up before this meeting, right?
But also,
and part of it is to have a pre-meeting of everyone else to say, this is what we're going to be saying. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the fucking bill of goods that we're going to present this guy with? Because, that was the thing. There was a caucus meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. and then there was a stand-up with Ardern scheduled for 4 p.m. It's like, we're going in with a very open mind, but just bear in mind we need to be finished by 4, which is when I announce he's suspended from caucus.
I mean, two things on that. One is that if there is some silver lining for the Labour Party, and this is that they had 2 caucus meetings on Zoom, and none of them leaked anything. It's the easiest thing in the world to record or to grab some part of a meeting when people aren't even in the room. When, the National Party in their bad days, and the Labour Party in their bad days too, not that long ago, you would get leaks literally out of the caucus room through the porous walls. So that didn't happen. The only other thing which we should just briefly touch on is the circumstances by which that pre-caucus, not a caucus meeting of the caucus came to light was very thick of it, because someone who's not been named in the meeting took a screenshot of Kelvin Davis on the screen during the Zoom meeting and accidentally sent it to Gaurav Sharma, meaning to send Gaurav Sharma some details about the setting up of the meeting the next day,
how plausible does this sound to us?
What is the alternative?
Well,
that they deliberately let him know and they wanted it out.
The alternative
if you're going
is
to leak that, wouldn't you leak more than just like a unco picture of Calvin Davis?
It wasn't a leak, it was an accident.
Yeah, it was an accident, but if you were leaking, what does one picture of Calvin Davis tell you? It's not like...
Somebody
it could literally have just been like Calvin, Jacinda and Grant Robertson for all we knew. So I don't think that it was intentional. Okay. I don't think it was intentionally done. I believe the narrative.
No.
Just in terms of the sort of Dan Brown decoding theme.
Kia ora.
One of my friends sent me the screenshot, as reproduced in media, and said, "What is up with Kelvin's nipples?" And we were looking at it, and I was like, "They're kind of like
we're now in the sealed section of the podcast."
I was like, CSI, back and to the left, and then we realised it was just like his thumbs, cut off by the screen. So the alternative. Here's my alternative, right? And look. We're all just speculating here. We're all just asking questions.
You're going to end up on Fire and Fury coming out with conspiracy theories like Calvin's nipples.
We're all just asking questions.
Right at this moment, linked to several antennae around the central city.
Was there a second Zoom link on the grassy knoll? Here's just a question that I'll put to people.
Just ask a question.
What if one of the disgruntled MPs, one of the same ones who was complaining about the whips or about turning up to work, who had previously texted Gaurav, and you don't say they're claiming to be bullied, they're just, they're sympathising. Yeah, it sucks. There is no worse position in Parliament than being a government backbench MP. You have nothing to do. You have to be in the building between about 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. on sitting days.
You could be a cleaner in Parliament. It's probably worse, having to clean up MPs' crap after them. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
At least then you're keeping busy. Like, being a government backbench MP is terrible. Half of them become alcoholics, on Courtney Place, heading out after, 10 p.m. It's a terrible business. But so it's not...
And just worth noting that in this is a massive caucus, and there were 22 new MPs in the intake, which by New Zealand standards is heaps.
Yeah, and there's no surprise that Gaurav Sharma and probably some of his colleagues were bitching about it to each other, right? And so my suspicion is that, of course, there were probably some people in the caucus who were still a little bit sympathetic to him because, by all accounts, he's a nice guy. He's obviously, he's made a big mistake politically and in terms of his life trajectory, but they would be thinking...
Going to Parliament was the first one.
I think it was, yeah. And... and so one of these sympathisers, kind of sends the screenshot. Gaurav Sharma, who we've discovered is not particularly discreet, he probably sends the screenshot back with the name attached to it to say, like, what's this about? Kieran McAnulty. He accidentally dobs his friend in. And then the friend, and then confronted by the monstrous Labour whips, the friend is like, okay, I am not Spartacus. Spartacus is over there. He's in Hamilton West. I have never claimed to be Spartacus. And basically this whole process, for the last, say, 6 days has been a process of everyone, kind of sort of disavowing his extreme interpretation of their sort of, kind of mundane, baseline level bitching about, kind of boring job. So that's my alternative hypothesis, is that people have been coming back, that Labour has been very much welcoming everyone back into the fold, apart from Gaurav. And...
I tuned out about halfway through there. I missed the key bit, but I'll listen back and then I'll provide my assessment next week. The other thing that this whole episode reflects, we've talked about it before on this podcast, I think, is just the weirdness of that particular job. It is not an ordinary job. You have a bunch of different bosses and managers. They talk about, the triangular setup that they have now. You've got parliamentary service who administer the place. You've got your caucus and the whips who represent them. You've got your local electorate, and of course you've got the voters who ultimately kind of are and should be your boss in democratic system. Whips, by the way, which is, reflects the reality of the kind of place you work, named after the people, I think, who used to whip the hounds into the fox hunt. This is the kind of environment that they work in, sometimes necessarily, right? You need discipline.
What's the Greens whip called?
Musterer.
The musterer.
Yeah, which is like what level does, like, what about hang on a minute, doesn't musterer imply farming animals for human digestion? Is that okay? Maybe they should be shepherds. No, shepherds is the same thing. Maybe
they should be the crop tenders.
Huggers. Corrallers. Annabelle. Weird job. Weird place.
Weird job, weird place. I was listening to an interview on RNZ the other day, and someone was pointing out that that we should remember that Parliament is swarming with HR people and really well-paid MPs and all of that stuff. And so while we're discussing things like workplace bullying, we should really bear in mind the minimum wage workers who are, don't have job stability and all of those sorts of things, and the bullying that people get subjected to that isn't covered in the headlines. I mean, it's a really difficult thing because you can't really performance manage MPs out. You can, but it's a 3-year cycle. It's not like dealing with managers or team leaders in your ordinary workplace. And then there's all the layers of, who parliamentary services is responsible for employing, and, who's managed by the party and all of those sorts of issues. So, there definitely is a culture issue at Parliament, and it's long running. And, this is just another example of how we see it play out in the media. I don't know what you do about it. It's just the weird thing of how Parliament runs.
I'm going to put on my old man cranky pants right now.
Oh, yeah.
And say I don't know that there is that much of a culture problem in Parliament. I mean...
Is that cranky or is that kind of hippie pants?
Well, I just think that... because remember, this sparked more complaints, right? So over the weekend, an unnamed former or current staffer of Anna Lorck, who's a new MP in the Hawke's Bay for Labour, also complained that Anna Lorck was bullying them. And the instances of bullying that were brought up were she made me move furniture for an hour in the office, and she asked me to drive her home when she'd been drinking at a function. Now, those are definitely overstepping the bounds of the strict terms of your employment agreement. If you're either an electorate agent or an executive assistant to Parliament, Parliamentary Services has people who can move furniture for you around offices, and you can get taxi chits if you have had drinks at a function. On the other hand, I think it's, without anything else, it's quite a stretch to call it bullying. If you have a staff member that you work with, you get enormous contact time with these people, right? Obviously, you get sick of them, and they get sick of you because you spend a fuckload of time with each other. But the thing is, if Anna Lorck has a few drinks at a function that she's attending as an MP, and her staff member is with her, and the staff member hasn't been drinking, she might say, "Oh, can you drop me off?" And she's not thinking. She's not thinking. I need to grind you down as my inferior. She's thinking, "You're my best friend."
I think it depends on the context, though, Ben. Like if that staffer's gone, like I've got to get home early tonight because my kids have got a thing on at blah blah, and she's like, "Nah, you need to stay here." And I'm not saying that's what Anna said, but like there's the details of these situations are important because they could literally cut either way. It could be that, you've got some sulky staffer that doesn't want to give their piss boss a ride home, or it could be that you've got someone who's got, family responsibilities who's getting ordered by their boss to stand around half the night while they're on the lash and drive them home. It's difficult to tell.
Absolutely, and one of the things that Ardern said yesterday in her press conference was that the facts aren't in dispute in relation to Gaurav Sharma's allegations, and one of which he mentioned in one of the Facebook posts was that he was called to Kieran McAnulty's office. He was waiting to see him, but McAnulty wasn't available to the meeting that he'd been called to, and it turned out that McAnulty had been watching the America's Cup. And you think, yeah, that's a bit of a dick move, but there is a difference between being a dick and being a bully. And I think sometimes the difference is, for example, in the Anna Lorck case, sounds like those are kind of dick moves. Those are dick moves. And the difference is if it happens 6 weeks in a row, then you get into a pattern, which I think then probably tips it over into a different category.
Yeah.
I mean, you would hope that after 6 weeks the furniture was in the right place. But at the same, you would definitely start thinking something was up every time you turned up.
That was implied, was that it was a punishment, right? That it was
what you need to get
pushing the sofa back and
come in the next day
down the office.
Can you do one of those like Otago University, which we don't want to get into that, which is like where you arrive and find that all of your furniture has been covered in newspaper, and it's like you need to fix that.
Yeah, or as the dad of Sam Uffindell's accuser said, not a stick of furniture left. We just get him up the office and give it a good clean up.
That's a segue.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama for Ko Papa Ko Rangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Sam Uffindell, let's get on to that because time is running short. Sam Uffindell was elected at the Tauranga by-election maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. I'm not sure. It was a vacancy created by Simon Bridges. And then 9 days ago, Kirsty Johnston for Stuff revealed that a former victim of his, someone who'd been assaulted by him when this victim was 13, Uffindell was 16 at the time. I think.
I thought it was 13 and 16, wasn't it?
13 and 16. Yep. Isn't that what I said? Anyway.
Sam Uffindell, he's tall timber. He would have been a big 16-year-old.
He'd have been a big 16-year-old.
He's a raw-boned kid.
Pretty
almost
brutal
as big as Ben Uffindell.
At King's College, Auckland, in which Uffindell and a few other boys, but he went in by himself and smashed this kid up when he was in bed, left him covered in bruises. Some dispute about whether or not involved the leg of a bed. Uffindell says he doesn't recall that. The victim says a bed leg was involved. Uffindell was then asked to leave, which is that very kind of heavy air quote terminology, by the school, and was moved to another posh school, St Paul's in Hamilton. Uffindell apologised to the victim 20-something years later after he returned to New Zealand from time abroad, and before he put his hand up to enter politics, he declared it to the pre-selection panel. It didn't make its way all the way up to Chris Luxon, nor did it make its way to the delegates who voted on who would be their candidate in Tauranga. What about this one, Annabelle? What do you make of the handling of it? What does it tell us about the nature of our politics, about whether or not the National Party candidate woes have been corrected or not? I've just asked you a whole bunch of questions.
Well, let me start by saying that I do feel some sympathy for Sam and the situation that he's in, and I don't think that, the things we do as young people should define us for the rest of our lives. But I think Sam is guilty of three things, which is A, naivety, B, a lack of appropriate atonement, and 3, hypocrisy. Or C, was I going by numbers or letters then?
Yeah, I think you were.
ABC, there you go.
Yep. Look, we didn't all go to King's.
I think,
who knows?
I think it was somewhat naive of him to think, and for the selection panel, that this wouldn't come out at some point. And I don't agree with the commentary around this, that it's politically motivated. I mean, this is actually the first whiff of this came out during the News Hub, the News Hub debate, when someone left a comment on the live stream saying you should ask him about his track record at King's and why he was asked to leave. And then, of course, the wonderful Kirsty Johnston broke her story about it. I think it was always going to come out, and the selection panel should have put a bit more protection around him. He did the right thing. He told them. It was up to them to then advise him and tell him how to best handle it, and I think he's been very poorly advised by them. In terms of the atonement, ringing someone and saying sorry in a Māori setting wouldn't cut it. Kanohi ki te kanohi, facing up to people's whānau and, showing, true aroha and empathy and remorse for what you've done is really important. And I feel, kind of sorry that there was no tikanga around this, because I feel like when those things happen, you're less likely to get into a situation where a few months later someone goes, actually, you know what, that was bullshit, and blows the whistle on you. And in terms of hypocrisy, if you read his maiden speech and what he says about gangs and violence and young people and stuff, it is so incredibly tone deaf for someone in his position. And again, I feel like that's where older, wiser heads should have stepped in and said, you know what, Sam, you should probably tone this down. Better yet, if he'd come out and said, when I was a young man, I was a bully and I hurt people, and I have a lot of shame and guilt about that. And that's become a big part of the reason why, I have political ambition, because I want to help young men like me, who like me, to become better men. I'm proving that you can go from being a ratbag to contributing positively to society. the media would have eaten that stuff up. There might have been a little bit of digging around about what had happened, but I think when you really own your past like that, there's so much mana and credibility in that, and like you really can tell a great story that matters to people. I think ultimately who's to blame in this situation is the selection board, and I also feel sorry for Christopher Luxon that they didn't even advise him. I suspect that they probably thought they were giving him plausible deniability, but they really hung their leader out to dry, and I feel bad for both Sam and Thing, but more importantly, I feel aroha for his victims who feel like they haven't been given the apologies and the empathy that they deserved.
Take that last point, Ben. I should mention just quickly in terms of context that Luxon defended the MP originally, and then subsequent allegations emerged via RNZ. To do with a former flatmate who had been in her room while he bashed on the door drunkenly was the allegation. Trashed the flat. The dad went down the next day to try and solve the situation is the allegation, which Uffindell disputes, at least parts of, and a QC, Maria Dew, has been appointed to conduct an investigation, which will come within the next fortnight, and then Luxon will make a call. Just on that point of Luxon knowing, I mean, again, asking you to delve deep into your vault of theories. Do you think the staffer erred in not telling Luxon, or do you think the staffer, as Annabelle says, offered plausible deniability to a leader? And if you imagine the counterfactual, if Luxon had been told, maybe he would have dealt with it, and I have no reason to doubt that he wouldn't have. However, if he hadn't, he would be on the line right now. As it is, he ain't.
The general theory of this is that staffers should insulate a leader from bad news, but they should also handle it. There seems to have been this sort of idea in this context, both first at the pre-selection panel, then with the staffer who knew, that sort of knowing it and parking it there in the airlock or the vault was enough. No, that's not the answer, right? The answer is that you're meant to take this information and deal with it. Like Annabelle says, this was really easy for Uffindell to incorporate into his narrative, his personal story, his personal brand. And he could have even stayed tough on crime while he did it. He could have said, I was a bit of a tearaway as a teen. I got into trouble. My life could have gone wrong. But for the tough love and harsh discipline of private schools and Tory philosophy.
Yeah,
and
it's a great story.
And if we just get out the cane
and
for these
sweeping it under the carpet worked for me, and it can work for you too.
Yeah, we can transfer these gang members away from the bad influences to another private school,
to St. Paul's,
and they can become financial middle managers overseas, just like me.
The managers of St. Paul's and King's to run all the Borstals, and it will be sweet.
And so, that was actually ACT policy in the 90s, and beyond that, I actually think the really interesting thing is the apology issue, which is how MPs do handle this, because everyone's got shit in their past, and increasingly, as we've seen more from the Sharma affair than the Uffindell one. People have a pretty low threshold now for identifying bullying and abuse and severe mistreatment, right?
Ghosting, gaslighting.
Ghosting, gaslighting, safe spaces, right? I don't want to sound like the whale oil blog or something, but so it is becoming increasingly difficult because, pre-Me Too, which would have been about 2017, 2018, I don't even think that there would be this kind of public recognition that, if you bullied someone as a kid 20 years ago, that getting in touch with them would be anything other than, a little unsettling or at best a bit weird. I don't think that was part of our sort of consciousness up until quite recently.
It's a good thing that it is, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if I agree with that.
It may or may not be.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think there would still be interest around this issue because I guess for a lot of New Zealanders, they see it as white privilege. Like brown kids and poor kids get kicked out of high school and then they end up in Borstal and then they end up in the justice system for the rest of their lives. And then people like Sam Uffindell try to pass legislation to like lock them up for their entire lives.
No, for sure.
But when Sam made a mistake, like all kids do, he was given a second chance and quietly checked into another incredibly expensive school. So I think there's some hypocrisy there that would pique the interest of most people.
Certainly I think the issue would definitely gain traction. I don't know if in the old days it would have been seen as a firing offence. I actually saw a Facebook post from a former politics tutor of mine.
It's not. The firing offence would be misleading Christopher Luxon. It's not a firing offence.
But so But what I mean is, like, in terms of this idea of what is the apology due to how do you head this off in a genuine, sincere, non-cynical way with the victims? Now, here he did apologise to the victim, the victim who is called, the young boy. So he's a young boy 20 years ago, right? The victim said that he was happy with the apology and felt good afterwards, and he only felt bad when he saw Sam Uffindell on TV, a year later, and thought, he was just doing that cynically to kind of cover his butt. Now, in this sort of, in the post-Me Too world,
I guess, can I just say that comes back to that old Pākehā whakatauki, justice delayed is justice denied. And if Sam had, had got him to apologise sooner, then, this wouldn't have happened.
Sure, and I think it's quite plausible that I think it's possible to hold two ideas, which is that, one, he did feel bad about it and did want to apologise now that he's 38-year-old father of daughters. Yeah. And that he didn't really think about it until he was going into politics. And then he had to think about skeletons in his closet. And he was like, oh, man.
Yeah, maybe that guy. Yeah. I agree.
I don't think people have been putting these things as oppositional. But I don't think they are. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of things where, you might think about sort of bad things you've done in the past and you're like, well, is it worth dredging it up? Or is it more sort of...
let sleeping dogs
lie. But people are going to have to come up with a way of dealing with this, because it is just going to become more and more treacherous for new MPs, new candidates, because as we see with the Anna Lork thing, the bar is getting quite low for things that you can get a newspaper allegation on, right? And I don't know what the way to do that is, because unless you do it sort of at the time, long before any political ambitions, there is always going to be that question of authenticity. And this is a really vexed issue, because I think the last thing that you would want is people who... I think the answer is probably just to be upfront about it, and then you kind of take the victim and sort of exposés out of it in terms of... Not that you take the victim out of it.
It's going to make you're not racing election campaigns are just going to be extended confessionals from now on.
I think you're right too, Ben, about, actually in these situations, sometimes both things are true, and I think that applies to Dr. Sharma's situation as well. I think he probably, didn't do a great job of managing his staff, and that steps were needed to create a better workplace for them. But in executing that, possibly some people were kind of dicks to him and made him feel isolated and minimised and disempowered, and that's led to feelings of alienation and stuff. So I don't think these things are necessarily as black and white as they seem, and actually there's truth in both narratives.
Absolutely. There we go again. Gone by lunchtime, crushing the dichotomies, looking for nuance in everything. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tia. Thank you to Scott Morrison. And we will be... I should say, back after this podcast, a special one coming up in which Ben Thomas's ex-boss, Christopher Finlayson, answers the hard questions like, why did he only give Ben one paragraph in his book? So stay tuned for that one. Kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.